Hey, good morning. It's April 14th and Senate Judiciary. We're taking up page 772, and we have Representative Mahali here to provide his perspective on the bill. So, floor is all yours.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you to all of you. I have to say, obviously, this is not an easy bill. It's not an easy bill to formulate. We spent nearly a year meeting with advocates for tenants, advocates for landlords, and had extensive hearings, and then really good work by our judiciary. I'd say essential work by our judiciary. Well, what did work? And so what you have before you is the result of our efforts in trying to craft something that will move us forward from the status quo, which we don't think is really working right now. But now it's your turn, and so I wish you the best, and I'm here to help you in any way I can. I figured what I would start with is just trying to let you know what the major pieces that we were working with and what our thinking was. But of course, going to help in your labors in any way I can. One way of thinking about this is what are the problems that we're facing? And one of the difficult things about this bill is that nobody's wrong. I mean, it's not as if the problems that tenants worry about aren't really real problems, and the same with the landlords. Maybe what I'll do is start with some of the reasons that people are evicted and how this bill addresses those reasons. We don't use in this bill words like no cause or just cause. They were just taken out of the bill because, frankly, I find that they're not completely accurate. They're filled with exemptions, and so we just figured let's just address each of the reasons. And one way of thinking about it is there are those reasons. Yes.
So does that mean that this bill gets rid of no cause eviction? So landlords now have to evict for cause?
No, that's not the case. No, we just don't. It's the term. I'm saying the term no cause in there, and I'll get to that. No cause eviction. This is one of the things that's not in this case. So certain of the reasons are where the landlord is the moving party. For example, the landlord wants to convert the building to family use. The landlord wants to sell the building. The landlord wants to completely renovate the building, so the tenant has to leave. Or the landlord decides for various reasons, and I want to talk about this, that they want to let the lease expire. So in that situation, the tenant, remember, they're paying rent. They're obeying the lease. And the landlord wants or needs them gone. And so what this bill does there is recognize that in this situation, tenants need time. And so it gives 3 months notice to tenants in those situations. And halfway through the 3 months, the landlord has to do a walkthrough, and if there's not damage, and if there's not damage, their deposit back so they can roll it into a new place. It takes a lot of money to get into a new place. So there are other areas where the tenant, in a way, is the moving party. It may not be their fault. I mean, if it's just that they don't have enough money, that's not their fault. But it's a tenant issue. And the two major areas there are the tenant is endangering the health or the safety of other tenants. Or the tenant is not paying rent, or the tenant is destroying the property. I think I'll take the first case first, the dangerous tenant. And I'm just going to use as an example one that's unfortunately twice common. I'm sort of walking through why that works, but it is. And I finished by saying, there are plenty of reasons where the landlord wants to convert the unit, and it's really their choice. It's not the tenant's choice to pay rent. In that case, what this bill is give 3 months notice and half the deposit back. Early. But if it's a situation of a dangerous tenant, I'm going to use as an example the drug dealer. I hate to say it, but I mean, we had many letters from both tenants and landlords. And I will tell you that the tenants were not uniform. Many of them expressed concerns that you'd think ordinarily would be landlord concerns. And many of the landlords talked about how happy they would be landlords and they were rather pro-tenant. It was a mixed bag of information. But the dangerous tenant problem is not a landlord problem. That is a landlord and a tenant problem. And it takes two forms. Drug dealers who are tenants and dealing drugs out of the building. And drug dealers who unfortunately aren't tenants, but they come in and they're occupying the unit either by force, intimidation, or by providing drugs. And that is really common. We heard about that a lot. And so the bill contains a provision. It doesn't change the process in any way. Generally, this bill doesn't change the substance of the process. It makes it quicker. And there, it's a 21-day process by which a landlord can assert you've got this dangerous tenant who's dangerous to the safety of other tenants or the landlord. And there's a hearing within 21 days. It's the same thing. I mean, the tenant, of course, appears and can provide contrary evidence, and the judge weighs the evidence and decides, just like all of this is the case. So it doesn't change the substance, it changes its quicker process that occurs. The issue that is in a way the most difficult, and I want to be clear about this, is the problem of the tenant who is paying rent. And this is really very common. We heard testimony from sheriff and this is the most common cause for eviction. And I know I was a legal aid attorney, and I can't tell you how many times people in another part a long time ago. I can't tell you how many times when people came to me, it was basically a version of the same thing. I don't know how any money, how long I got. So what about this group? Well, I want to emphasize something. We feel the best way to combat the possibility that these people will end up homeless is by directly addressing homelessness, not by maintaining a process which in the moment, right now, eviction is very expensive and takes 2 to 3 times longer in Vermont than in neighboring states. We are an outlier. And the result, we feel, is that you have to remember who provides, particularly those of us who live in cities, and I count myself in myself. You have to remember in Vermont, in rural Vermont, housing is rental housing is provided primarily by very small landlords who have 4 or 5 units. These people cannot afford somebody who's just not paying for a long period of time or destroying their unit. We feel that the best way to address homelessness is not by maintaining a system which is discouraging these people from remaining in business. We are seeing landlords leaving the business of being landlords. We heard a lot of testimony and anecdotal evidence that small landlords just find it too difficult. On the other hand, people who have a real problem with people who can't pay the rent and sooner or later could end up on the street or in a motel room at a lot of expense. And there, the bill contains appropriations. One of the appropriations made it out of our resolutions here, and that was $1 million to continue the tenant arrears payment assistance program run out of the Vermont State Housing Authority. That's a good program. It I think will become better, but it is a good program. And it's designed for the person who ultimately can pay rent, but something bad has happened to them. It's a one-time 2 or 3 month problem. And this program steps in and pays the rent for them for 3 months or so directly to the landlord. So it's a program that helps both parties, and it's really done well. So it ran out of money 2 weeks ago. This bill contains $1 million to get it going again. What didn't make it out of our appropriations committee is $600,000 to install tenant landlord assistance people in all of the the poverty centers in each community, CAP agencies. Thank you. The CAP agencies. And that kind of soft help can really make a difference in preventing eviction or helping prevent eviction. We also had $200,000 for CVOEO to run a landlord and tenant program teaching people, because there's a lot of small landlords who don't know this stuff. What are their rights, their responsibilities, and their remedies? Both landlords and tenants. And also $100,000 for the treasurer's office to run a program which has made it out of both the House and the Senate and just got lost. Right? In between House and Senate versions of the housing bill. And that's something that's a positive credit rental reporting program. Right now, there are many people who don't have a credit card, they don't make payments that ever make it onto a credit report. So they have no credit report, but they pay rent. And this is a pilot program where that rent payment goes into protecting giving them a credit rating. So those are the money things that are in there designed to try to help abate the possibility that people who don't have rent, don't have money, can avoid homelessness.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, so when you say didn't make it out of appropriations, didn't make it into the budget.
Right, out of the House, it's not in the House budget. The $1 million for the rental arrears program is in the House budget, but the other programs, I'm sitting here advocating for them.
Yep.
With Robin's knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think, I think the bill to try to address this problem that we're out of sync with other states, the bill has a deadline in it. Initially we had that once something was filed that you had to have a hearing within 60 days. And the judiciary testified, Judge Zone testified that he thought the bill was, he testified before us and before judiciary. It was very helpful and we followed every suggestion that he had. And initially he thought they just couldn't do the bill without more resources. But judiciary extended the 60 to 90 days. That's an improvement, and it's not all of the deadlines are precautionary. The judiciary can always extend them for a good cause. They're not absolute. What we don't do in this bill and cannot do constitutionally is we do not tell them when to decide things. We tell them when they have to hear them. And because of separation of powers, we don't tell them when to decide. So anyway, that's the bill. Bill does not change the process very much, other than the quicker 21 days for the dangerous, someone who's endangering safety, or overall 90 days to set a hearing. Pretty much things stay the same, and that way the bill is pretty modest, considering how much heat and light it has generated. What's not in the bill, and I want to acknowledge this, we just didn't feel like we could move it, is what's called just cause. And I want to explain one thing. Remember what just cause is and isn't. Just cause refers to the ability of a tenant who is paying rent and obeying the lease to stay indefinitely. But that's what just cause is. There are 4 states, to my knowledge, that have just cause. And they are always have paired with it some form of rent control or rent cap. Because if you think about it, the offer to allow a tenant to, let's say I negotiate with you a 12-month lease. You can keep it on the tenant. It doesn't really mean 12 months. As long as I pay rent, I can stay. But you could say, not that you would, oh, sure, you can stay for an extra $2,000 a month. So then it would be meaningless. So it's always paired with rent caps. And I think Maine, I think that New York has it, but for example, New York exempts all the rural areas of New York. It's only the urban areas. And they're very interesting and difficult issues presented by no cause, which I'm happy to discuss further, but we did not. We had 6 bills in front of us. 2 of them contained no cause and rent caps. And we considered those, but we elected not to go forward. I will say one reason for that is in Vermont, right now, with its rural landlords, people find the process of eviction so lengthy and expensive that most often landlords just elect to run the lease out. And if they don't have that option, as long as it takes, as long as it does, and it's as difficult as it is, rural landlords effectively argued to us that they needed the ability to let leases go. I guess at that, I'm happy to answer questions. I appreciate your taking this up.
Thank you. My first question, and this may be a question for Judge Dome, but you had mentioned the 90 days, having a hearing within 90 days. Do you know what the estimated average is for having a hearing now?
Yes. I know it to the extent I've been told. What I'm told by Judge Zone and others is that it's like 75 to 80% of the cases are resolved within 6 months, 180 days. And that compares with 2 to 3 months to the United States.
And is that,
So 20% are not resolved within that time.
and is that for the cases where the property is being sold, or if there's no written rental agreement? Because I see that there's some in which the timeline is 90 days, and then for non-payment of rent, there's 10 days, breach of rental agreements, 21 days. And then threatening the health or safety of others is 5 days. Can you expand a bit more
Yes.
on those?
Yes, remember, it's important to remember that there's sort of 2 completely separate issues here. One is when the landlord gives notice to the tenant, notice that the lease is terminating. Okay, that's between the landlord and the tenant. Those are the notice provisions. All the time frames that you just went through are all about how much time you have to give the tenant notice. So then if the tenant doesn't leave, the landlord has to file an eviction, and that's the judicial process. So the process the answer that I just gave you is about just the judicial process. It's the time between when a complaint is filed and the time in which the judge is required, absent good cause, to set a hearing, and that's 90 days. My guess, if the judiciary can, you're probably talking, well, you're talking about a notice period, as you said, Chairman, is somewhere between 5 to 21 days. And then add on to that the 90 days. And then add on to that time it takes the judge to make a decision. And then add on to that let's say a landlord prevails, all right? They prevail in court. They get a writ of possession and a judgment, and they give that to the sheriff. The sheriff then has as long as it takes to serve the writ. And from the time they serve it on the tenant, if the tenant is still in after all that, there's in current law and in this bill, there's no change. It's 14 days. At the end of 14 days, an eviction can happen and the tenant, the landlord can get their stuff. I do want to mention one thing. There is a difference here. Let's say I'm a landlord, and let's say the tenant doesn't pay rent. Their rent is due on the 1st, and they don't pay. On the 2nd, under existing law, I can file an eviction notice, a notice of termination. This defines late rent. The rent has to be late by more than 10 days. So there's there's a grace period built into this. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
That does help. That grace period of 10 days, that doesn't, is it currently 14 days or am I misunderstanding?
There's
There's no grace period. Yeah.
The 14 days refer to, of course, there's all these different things. It's the period of time between the time that the judgment and writ is served on the, and then the time of eviction.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm looking at this,
The table?
at this table, and I'm wondering if you can tell us in the construction of this, does this represent a give and take for landlords and?
May I look at the table
Sure.
for a minute and refresh my memory?
And
I know the answer is yes.
yeah,
Yes,
just wondering if you can.
there were bills before us for non-payment of rent. There were bills before us that said the notice period should be 3 days. We started with a period of 7. We heard testimony that I think was quite reliable from tenant advocates, C.V. Olio and others, who talked about how long it takes a tenant, and particularly tenants who are suffering from any disability, to get it together to go get help. And so it was increased to 10. The current status is 14. The only thing I will say is that we also made another change, which is I have to say, which is that in current law, if you mail the tenant a notice that they're out, it's presumed to have been delivered to the tenant within 3 days. Well, today the mail is not what it was. And so we increased that to 5.
And if I could,
There was a lot of back and forth on each of these, including the time difference.
unclear. In the answer you just gave, you described the compromise as going up from 3, but according to the current system, it's still going down.
Yes,
There are a number
it
of
was.
these.
A number of them are quicker.
So I'm wondering about, was there movement? In other words, somebody who's thinking primarily of tenants' rights might say, oh, all these dates have been reduced. Tenants' security has been reduced. I'm just wondering if there was a, corresponding increase maybe in certain time limits that protect tenants in those homes.
The 90 days. We really felt that with tenants, whenever the landlord is kind of in control, we ended up thinking differently about the basket of situations where the landlord is really the moving party. They want to repurpose it. They want it for their families. They want to sell it. They want to remodel it. The tenant could be doing everything right. So for that situation, we increased the time limits in most situations to a uniform 90 days, 3 months, and then halfway through that, this is new and not entirely welcome with some. We provided that there has to be a walkthrough 45 days into it, and half the money half the deposit given back to the tenant so that the tenant can roll it over to a new rental unit. In other words, along with the money, which we hope is appropriated with this, what we're really trying to do is to prevent evictions and prevent disruption and homelessness in situations where the tenant is really doing what they need to do. So the 90 days, and yes, that was there. The notice provisions, the other notice provisions were shortened in part, mostly for people who are not paying rent or are damaging the apartment or dangerous tenants. Again, we got a lot of testimony about the dangerous tenant. By dangerous tenant, I mean a tenant who's endangering the safety of others. And they'd have to prove that. Actually, if a landlord wants to avail themselves of that quick 21-day process, judicial process, they have to file an affidavit under penalty of perjury saying exactly what happened and what they saw, what they knew, et cetera. Part of the problem that we were trying to get with that affidavit is to let the tenant know what's going on right at the start, not wait to some hearing where all of a sudden witnesses are provided. And also for the landlord, so that they don't have to get witnesses right at the start when a lot of people are terrified to testify. They just won't testify. And so we're trying to do something there about that situation. That was very short. That process we shortened because we're trying to give landlord and other tenants. We had lots of correspondence from tenants who were saying, why do I have to live with this neighbor who's, dealing drugs right out of their apartment and I've got kids?
But you, just to clarify, you view it as a balancing act where you,
Yes,
on the one hand, the 90 days provides more security for a tenant and then the bill there, facing shorter deadlines.
yeah, it was exactly that. It was back and forth and a balancing act.
Thank you.
I assume the answer is yes, but did you take testimony from the legal entities that are representing tenants facing evictions like Legal Services Vermont, Legal Aid, CDOEO?
Yes, I started this process by meeting with Legal Aid a year ago. And then we met with Legal Aid and other tenant advocates repeatedly in the fall. Senator Clarkson and I, and we also met with organized landlord groups. We had 2 or 3 sessions, I can't remember how many, with both in the same room, having discussions. They were extremely civil, but not terribly productive.
Yes, sitting on the landlord tenant task force, I had a similar experience.
That's right. You and Ashley and Joe were on that task force.
Yeah, I'm wondering where the data about our eviction timelines being out of sync with others came from, because my understanding, unless this has changed significantly since we did that task force, is Vermont's are right on par with the national averages.
We had testimony from 2 sources. We had testimony from the Vermont Landlords Association provided us a table that was a result of their investigations, which I hope they will provide you. And if they don't, I'm happy to provide it. And we had correspondence from where's Elizabeth from?
Elizabeth Goodwater?
Yeah,
Wyndham and Windsor Housing.
it might have been Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, or it could have been from Kathy Byer of she's with Evernorth.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious because.
But we definitely are under the impression that Vermont is an outlier in the northeastern states. And in fact, there are some states, which I'm not sure I would want them to anyway, that are much faster than even 2 months.
Okay, yeah, it's just interesting because NCSL testified to the Landlord Tenant Commission that Vermont was exactly on par with the national average. So I was just curious about that. I wonder if you are aware that just cause eviction actually has sort of 2 aspects to it. One around non-renewal of lease and one around not being able to just evict someone because you feel like it.
Well, many just cause ordinances will allow eviction if the landlord wants to repurpose the unit. If they want to sell the unit, if they want to, if they want to use it for their family, or if they want to remodel it, which is all they're really, this bill is identical in that respect.
Right, but it doesn't eliminate the ability for a landlord to decide they just don't like someone, so they're going to evict them.
Right, they can't do that now, and they can't do that under this bill. They can only non-renew the lease. There is no ability under current law or 772 to evict someone because you don't like them.
That's not true. No cause eviction means that there's no cause, that you are evicting them without providing a reason why.
Yeah, if it's month to month, but my understanding is, I could be wrong, you have to let the lease run. The lease is a binding contract.
Unless you disrupt it with eviction.
Well, I guess that's something we should check, or you should certainly look into that. But this bill is very clear in what it allows and what it does not.
Can we ask? a question?
Senator Norris had a question and then we can.
My bad.
I hope I'm not wrong, because I want to be right all the time. It's pretty bad. Okay.
Yes, I wonder if you could educate me somewhat on the deposit program, how it works, because in looking at the current statute, if the property is sold and repurposed, they move into 90 days, and generally speaking, if in fact I received notice that the property is being sold or repurposed and I'm the tenant, there's really not a whole lot of incentive for me to pay the rent for those next 90 days. So what does the deposits look like? How much is enough to cover 90 days of rental, or just touch on that a little bit?
Final deposit, yeah. We received really contradictory evidence on this issue. There are a lot of people, generally tenant advocates, who argue that it takes a lot of money to move into a place, and so they wanted a limitation on the amount of the deposit, the security deposit, to be 1 month. We heard a lot of testimony that from others that it should be longer, a lot longer. Mostly what we heard was evidence from landlords that it's not anywhere near enough. In other words, that we heard again and again. See, the problem is it's hard to make law to deal with horror stories, and then everyone else is kind of caught in the middle. But we did hear horror stories of people who were talking about many thousands, $10,000 worth of damage to their place and rent not paid, and that any amount of deposit would be inadequate. And there was a bill, one of our bills had 3 months deposit. We ended up with 2. I mean, frankly, it was a compromise between 1 and 3 or 4.
So
And it is, I will say that I have heard evidence that in many situations, the 2 months would be inadequate, 3 months would be inadequate. But we were trying to balance the needs of a tenant population that doesn't have access to a lot of cash with the landlord's need to have some security, and we came up with the balance.
So it appears this 30 to 90 days is not affording much protection for the landlords.
The 90 days is the notice that the landlord has to give to the tenant. And it is true that if a tenant wants to abuse that and not pay rent, they can do that. We decided, frankly, we heard a lot of testimony that most tenants are good tenants. And most landlords are good landlords, and that most tenants aren't going to play that game. But yes, it's possible. 2 of those 3 months could be compensated for under this bill with the security deposit. Oh, and the security deposit thing is not retroactive. In other words, if someone has negotiated a 3-month security deposit, it stands. It's prospective, but it's a problem.
Sounds like.
We hear from Ledge Council regarding the no cause question, and then Senator Hosty, and then we'll move on to the next witness here.
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel, there was a question or a discussion there a second ago about you can evict someone because you don't like them. And I would say it's yes, with a condition. If you have a written lease agreement, you have to have a reason to evict someone and break the lease agreement. So you would have to have non-payment of rent, breach of the material terms, etc. However, to the senator's point, you do not need any reason to terminate the rental agreement at the expiration of the written lease, or if there is no written lease, to just evict the individual at any point, as long as you give them notice. So yes, if you don't like someone, or for no reason, as long as it's not discriminatory, for no reason, the landlord can say at the expiration of this lease, I don't like you. If they so choose to say that, I don't like you, here's your notice, you're out. And if there is no written lease, then as long as they're giving the appropriate notice, and currently that is 60 or 90 days, then the person could be.
They don't
So
have
it's
to
a
say
yes.
why. And they don't have to tell you why under current law. Under this bill, they have to say why.
But under current law, there is also an item that the landlord can include in the lease, a no cause eviction clause that would allow them to break the lease for no cause. I'm looking at it in 9 VSA subchapter 4467 subsection E, termination for no cause under terms of a written rental agreement. If there's a written rental agreement, so it can be in the lease.
But I think that section says, if there is a written lease agreement and you provide this much notice before the expiration of the term, then you can evict at that point. I don't think it allows the landlord to break the lease during the period the lease is in effect.
Okay, it's not how I read it, but I'm happy to have a deeper conversation offline about that. Oh no, I did have another question, and it was sort of around the issue of tens of thousands of dollars of damage. I would assume that the landlord would have homeowner's insurance that would pay for that repair.
I think I would assume so too. I don't know. I really don't know, and we did not say testimony on the extent of commercial insurance and what it pays and what it doesn't. I'm assuming, but I don't know, that small landlords are going to be a little reluctant to make a claim because we know what happens in Vermont if you make claims anywhere. It's getting here, yeah. But I don't know, Senator Mahowski, he did not take this.
Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure, anytime.
I believe we have Judge Villeneuve on the Zoom. And Officer Coro. Still good for 11:30? Yes, sir. Oh, thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge. Terry Corsones is with me this morning, and Terry has been the one who has led the testimony for the judiciary in connection with timelines. And I know, Senator Hashim, you started off with a question about timelines earlier. If it's okay with the committee, I could have Terry go first, and she can address the timelines, and then I have some areas that I would touch on.
That sounds good. Terry?
Or I can go, or I will go first.
Okay. Well,
Here we go.
Oh, there she
Sorry.
goes.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
I clicked, but it didn't register. Thank you for the opportunity, Terry Corson, State Court Administrator. And those were the areas I was going to address. And I can just in a nutshell kind of give overview for each of the three areas in the current version of H 772 that imposes kind of mandatory timelines on the courts and the impact that will have on court operations. As Representative Mahaley indicated, there's two categories of cases now are proposed that would have expedited hearings. Currently, the non-payment of rent reason for evictions, which comprise about half of the cases, the landlord-tenant cases now. And there are about 1,800 landlord-tenant cases statewide presently. About half involve motions for payment of rent into court. That's when the eviction cause is non-payment of rent. And there's supposed to be 10 days notice to the parties before the hearing. Oftentimes a motion for non-payment of rent is filed with the complaint, and the notice of hearing would be included as well. And that's been in effect for a number of years, and it's been, in my view, very successful in terms of arriving at resolution of the cases. Resolution might mean the landlord saying, for example, we'll forgive you rent, you agree to a writ of possession. That might be the resolution. It might be a resolution where they make up the rent. They have it like an abbreviated plan or a staggered plan to make up the rent. But that has been effective at, I think, resolving a number of the cases. You asked about the disposition. Right now, and Representative Mahaley indicated approximately 80% of the cases, all cases, eviction cases, are resolved within the current 180-day, 6-month disposition guideline. And that doesn't mean that they all resolved at the 6-month mark. About half of them resolved at the 5-month mark, and another 20% at the 4-month mark. So they have been resolved within that 6-month time frame. In any cases, and Representative Mahaley pointed out, 20% are not. Those might be cases where the landlord has requested an extension, has requested a continuance. I mean, that's not unheard of. So there's a variety of reasons kind of playing into the timelines. H772 doesn't have any changes in terms of the non-payment of rent scenario. It's after 10 days, and then the hearing is held. The courts have, as a result of the rent escrow provision, set up scheduling blocks around the state where rent escrow scheduling blocks are already scheduled and built into the civil schedule. For example, in Chittenden, it has the highest number of cases. They have rent escrow hearings scheduled 3 days a month. Rutland and Bennington have 2 to 3 days a month. Kind of going down as the the counties get smaller. Caledonia, Franklin, Orleans, Washington have 2 days a month. The smaller counties might have 1 day a month, and then several have as needed because they may not need them 1 day a month. So there's a system built in now for scheduling blocks to have these rent escrow, again, half of the landlord-tenant cases heard very regularly. The new category of case that's proposed in H772 for threats to health and safety, that is something new, and it requires a shorter timeline within 10 to 21 days for a hearing to be scheduled. So that means trying to figure out where to fit those in, and we have no idea how many new filings might result for this new category of cases. I'd suggested to Lori Canty when we saw the bill that we may want to just include the threats to health and safety hearings in the current rent escrow scheduling blocks to start, just because we know those are regularly set up, and then kind of measure and see how often how many new filings would result and how many, how much more hearing time would be needed. But that's how we would propose kind of to address that category. The other aspect that involves the timelines is the provision, and that's in new 4863 at 21, where it says that the final hearing has to be scheduled within 90 days. That would be problematic in the sense that we only have so many hours to schedule for civil hearings. In the larger counties where you have a civil division judge, a judge that only does civil cases, there's more flexibility. But even then, in those counties, I think every civil judge, in addition to their civil docket responsibilities, helps cover in the other dockets. That might mean covering RFA hearings, or that might mean covering mental health hearings. I don't think you have any court where a civil division judge is hearing civil 5 days a week. So just to be aware of that. In the smaller counties, where it's a multi-jurisdictional, you'd have the same judge hearing civil, criminal, and family. So they might be scheduled for civil 1 day a week or less, depending upon the number of civil filings. So just to be aware that kind of scheduling these civil hearings is not necessarily, there's not a ton of civil hearing docket time that's available. So it would mean trying to figure out, where to fit those times in. When it says within 90 days also, if it's a case that's one of the non-payment of rent or the threat to health and safety cases, which is going to be more than 50% of the cases, that means that we're required to schedule 2 hearings within one case within 3 months' time, which would be very unusual, kind of and very tight. the other comment made, or we made before was it's 90 days after the complaint is filed. So that's within 3 months after the complaint is filed, and that doesn't even count the usual, 20 to 30 days when an answer might be filed. So our point is it's just a very short time frame. And if we're required to schedule it within that short time frame, it's going to be to the detriment of other cases in the civil docket, for sure, because we only have so many hours. And when you have half of the landlord-tenant cases, which comprise basically a quarter of the total civil docket, and having to schedule 2 hearings in a case within 3 months, it's just a lot of hearing time for a lot of cases that are not, at play now. So I just wanted to make mention of that to give you kind of from the court's perspective. We would, of course, whatever the ultimate bill specifies, do our best to comply, but there would be those pressures in terms of trying to find time in a day to schedule hearings on what is a short timeline, certainly compared to, the general civil docket.
Do you have any recommendations for how you would prefer to see the timelines?
Well, I don't disagree that the threats to health and safety, that category of cases, it sounded like, and as Representative Mahali, I participated in those task force hearings. I think there was the effort to try to expedite those, and for a whole variety of reasons, some of which were landlords said we're going to wait until the criminal hearing is resolved before we try to. Instead of us trying to prove a criminal activity, I think it's helpful to have them separated out and a niche for them to be heard more quickly. But I think the 90-day overall timeline, what would be helpful would be if it could be 90 days, for example, even from after the answer is filed. That would help, just to extend it so that we don't have to try to fit in 2 hearings in those category of cases within a very short time frame.
Thank you. Senator Kozlowski?
I'm just wondering, given the court backlogs, if sort of front loading much quicker way these types of cases, how that would impact the backlog in other cases, and if there is the capacity to sort of do that within the system.
Well, that would definitely, Senator, delay, for example, the hearing times for the other categories. Just to give you an overview, there's about 10,000 civil filings, new civil filings every year. And the bulk of, in the civil division, small claims comprises 3,000 of those 10,000. So that's the most. If you take small claims out, landlord-tenant is the next. Landlord-tenant comprises, if you take out small claims, 25% of the civil case dockets. And then after that, with about 1,800 a year. After that, collection cases are 1,500 and stalking cases are about 1,500 as well. So 15 and 15. So 80% of the cases are small claims, landlord-tenant, collection, stalking. Landlord-tenant with 25% of that number is a chunk. So if we're kind of making that or expediting that many more cases in landlord-tenant, it will definitely impact the time with which we can address the other cases. I mean, what we would do and what we've always done is if there's been a new legislation that increases demands on court scheduling or court resources, we look at, okay, how many new filings are resulting? How much more hearing time is involved? Do we need to ask for more resources in order to not fall further and further behind in processing cases in general?
Okay, so, and I guess my next question, so I know in the criminal division, cases are prioritized kind of based on severity. When I hear that stalking cases might be delayed, that makes me pretty concerned. Does the civil division prioritize cases? I mean, I guess you wouldn't be able to prioritize those cases dictated.
Yeah. Oh. Stalking, we have to abide by the timeline for stalking as well. That has to be heard within a certain period of time, and we can't change that. So it would be the other categories, whether it's small claims, collection, foreclosure, tort. Those don't have the prioritization, if you will. that stalking and landlord tenant does currently.
Senator Norris.
Yes, Jerry, I just need a clarification, just so I assume I know the answer to this, but the is it 90 consecutive days to include weekends and holidays, or is it 90 business days?
It's 90, a day is a day. So it includes weekends and holidays,
Thank
not
you.
90 business days.
Thank you. Terry, did you have anything else or did we want to pass the judge on it?
Oh, no, thank you. I strictly was looking at scheduling, just again, to hopefully provide helpful information about the overall picture for how landlord tenant fits into the civil docket.
Thank you very much. Judge Donovan?
So good morning again, Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge. I am working off of the as passed unofficial version. On page 2, line 13, there is a definition under definition number 12 for actual and imminent threat. On line 15, it references serious bodily harm. It does not use the phrase serious bodily injury. Serious bodily injury is defined and utilized in many statutes in Vermont. It's defined in Title 13, Section 1021A2. Serious bodily harm is not a similarly defined term. And so I just wanted to point out that the court will have to determine what does serious bodily harm mean. Generally, as the committee knows, statutory terms are deemed to be put in for a reason. And so if the legislature intends us as judges to understand harm as something different than injury in this section, that's what we're going to have to do. If the intent is serious bodily injury, and you know that term again is the one that is generally defined, and there are some statutes, very few I believe, that have used the phrase serious bodily harm. But if you want to make it very clear, you could say serious bodily injury if that's the intent, and then have the statutory reference. On page 9, there is a reference. It's the first time the reference appears on line 17, subsection B, and it says the landlord shall allow a tenant who is the victim of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking committed by another tenant or lawful occupant to bifurcate the rental agreement as authorized in section 4472A of this title. And what that does, if you now go to page 16 of the bill, section 1A adds a new statute at 9 VSA 4472A, and it talks about right to bifurcation. I'm not going to read the whole statute, but what it talks about is it says the landlord shall authorize a protected tenant to bifurcate a rental agreement. There are a number of questions that this new section gives rise to. Who raises the issue? Who files the motion? What's the process for going forward? How does the landlord know to be able to authorize the tenant to take these steps? What if the landlord doesn't agree with the tenant as to the tenant's status or the underlying facts? Does that now cause an additional hearing that the court has to have on whether or not the landlord and tenant in their relationship has an issue with this bifurcation statute? It also talks about, if you go to page 17, lines 6 and 7, it says a reasonable opportunity under this section shall be not less than 90 days. And that refers to the prior subsection, which talks about a tenant not having to pay rent based upon this bifurcation, and there's a process that they can go through and they get extra time. Now, certainly that's a policy decision, but it gives rise to questions such as, what if there is already an arrearage when that 90 days begins? How does the court handle that? What type of notice does the landlord have to give for a termination based upon an arrearage or non-payment? If this section's also applicable, does it begin at the first part of the 90 days, or does the landlord wait until the end? And so I point these out as areas that the court would have to address, and areas that seem as though they may be ripe for adding additional hearings and disputes within landlord-tenant matters if this statute were to pass as it's currently written. On page 17 also, section 2, this talks about alternate service of process. What we commonly hear about alternate service of process is that phrase tack order. Vermont rules of civil procedure have provisions, and the Vermont Supreme Court has addressed how due process and tack orders and things like that work. This section references that statute, references that rule, and says that the court shall rule on the motion promptly. There's 3 references within H 772 to the word promptly. This is the first of them. And my comments are equally applicable to the next 2 sections. Is the inclusion of the word promptly intended to say that where the legislature does not include the word promptly, it doesn't need to be in other hearings or other actions by the court? And I don't say that flippantly, but when we add words, they should mean something to the judges and the courts and the citizens to know here's what we really mean. And so if every time this is a motion, we know how the courts address motions all the time. There's rights that parties have to respond, and the court's goal is to address every filing in every docket promptly. And so when you add this type of language in a statute, it starts building statutes that say promptly, and then there's statutes that don't say promptly. And is it really the intent to have statutes that were supposed to address promptly and others that were not? I doubt that. And so I would just point that out, that is it necessary to add that type of language in this section and the other sections that where it's added? Again, every filing should be addressed promptly in accordance with the established rules of procedure and the parties' rights in a case. On page 21.
Judge, before
I'm sorry.
move on, I wanted to ask about this as well regarding, this is going back to page 1, line 18 and 19, which is posting to the door of a dwelling unit. And I think the question that I had, I can't quite decipher it from my notes, is whether or not this type of service would, with the way the bill is written, require getting approval for alternate service or not.
This is prior to the rules of civil procedure becoming applicable. This is the notice for termination. So this is before we have the court process where the rules would apply.
So, and Rule 4 already has language in it, as best as I can remember, regarding posting to somebody's door, right?
Rule 4 has a mechanism that can allow a party to file for alternative service that could allow a posting.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would just note, I think my last 2 comments again were similar to my last comment on promptly. It's on page 22 on a motion for default judgment. It says the court shall rule on it promptly. And on page 22 again, on line 14, there's also a reference to when we schedule a hearing on the threatening behavior expedited hearing. It's anytime after 10 days. It has to be held promptly. Anytime after 10 days notice, but not later than 21 days. Well, we already have 10 to 21 days, and so it's in there. Again, the question for the committee and the legislature is whether adding promptly is something that is deemed necessary and advisable, and that's a policy decision.
In the sections where it refers to unless there's good cause shown, can you describe what that means in this context? How would you interpret that?
That would be causing me in some respects to be giving advisory opinions on matters that may come before the court. So I have to be very cautious. What I would say is good cause has generally been interpreted to be a reason that we would look at and say, okay, there's a real reason that we can't go forward. It shouldn't generally be something that we know is always going to happen. In other words, where you're having all these timelines, good cause would generally not be, well, we're busy. Good cause would be, well, we had a hearing scheduled for the day before, and unfortunately, one of the party, the plaintiff, the landlord had a medical issue and they were taken to the hospital, so we couldn't have the hearing in that timeline, so we had to move it. Something like that would oftentimes could be found to be good cause, but it's very fact dependent.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I got a quick.
That North or
Second Norris, yes. Morning, Judge Loney.
Good morning.
I was inquiring about the 30 to 90-day extension on this period of time here. Presently reached 30 days, going to 90 days. And the question came up, what if someone doesn't pay their rent? And that quite possibly cause tens of thousands of dollars of damage to the apartment they're in. And then there was a statement or comment made that would expect the landlord would have insurance to cover that, quite possibly their per diems or their premiums to go up, they make it drop. So I'm not asking for advice on this. I'm just saying, does the landlord have the opportunity to either go after them in civil court or criminal court or both, if in fact this did occur?
Cases that would be brought in the criminal division would be cases that are brought by the Attorney General or by the state's attorneys. So if there is criminal activity that takes place in a residential rental unit, the landlord certainly has the opportunity, if they believe that a crime has been committed, to speak with the state's attorney or the Attorney General to see if something could be brought in the criminal division. Absent that, the landlord has the opportunity to avail themselves of any statutory rights that they may have for bringing actions within the civil division. And that could be small claims action or landlord tenant or another type of case.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Judge, thank you. I think due to timing, we'll have to invite you back for 578 in the relatively near future, but thanks for being available.
My pleasure. Have a good day. Take care.
You as well.
I do just want to, I went and looked at some of the stuff from the Landlord Tenant Commission that I was on, and I do just want to make a correction. There are 7 states that have just cause eviction, and they don't track entirely with ones that have rent stabilization or rent control. Currently, the only states that have both, there are 4 states that have both, but there are 7 states that have just cause eviction. I just wanted to correct that.
Okay. All right, so we're switching gears to 171. And we have Officer Coro here with us. You're welcome to join us up at the witness seat. 1 second. I was here for 7 seconds. Okay, yes, go. Do you have any extra copy that you want to you guys? Thank you. Thank you. It's usually around the times of paperwork. It's much higher. So, thank you for coming in. We're switching gears to page 171, and we have Officer Coro here to testify on this. And you could just introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Joe Coro. I serve as the president for Vermont Fraternal Order of Police State Lodge. Represent 336 law enforcement officers across the state of Vermont. Membership includes officers working in municipal police departments, sheriff's departments, and Vermont State Police. I've been with the BPD for nearly 12 years. Spent my first 9 years assigned to patrol. I served as a training officer, continue to instruct patrol procedures, focus on officer safety tactics. I currently serve in the Detective Services Bureau, specifically the Narcotics Unit, and I'm a team leader of our Emergency Response Unit. I'm also the immediate past president of the Burlington Police Officers Association, FOP Lodge 21, where I assisted officers through multiple Attorney General review critical incident investigations. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. This bill, as it shows now, with the official House passing it, establishes a process that relies on a group of law enforcement professionals to develop policy and guidelines related to officer-involved critical incidents, specifically officer-involved shootings. That makes this fundamentally a question of structure and representation. Who is formally included in that process will determine whether the final framework is complete, credible, and durable. I want to address terminology that was used during prior testimony before House Judiciary, where officers were referred to as defendants, and individuals involved in these instances were referred to as victims. I just wanted to refer to this because this language raises concern for us, not because of intent, but because of what it suggests about the starting point of the review process. At the time an officer involved critical incident is under investigation, all parties are subject to a fact-finding process. No charging decision has been made, and no legal determination has been reached. Referring to officers as defendants and others as victims at that stage risks creating the perception of prejudgment before the investigation and review are complete. In cases where an officer's use of force is ultimately determined to be lawful and justified, the officer was responding to a violent act or an imminent threat. In that context, they are not a defendant in any meaningful sense and may in fact be a victim under the underlying criminal conduct that led to the use of force. The reason this matters here is because this bill places responsibility for shaping policy and process into the hands of a working group. The language and assumptions brought into that process will directly influence the final product. This is exactly why the Vermont FOP must have a formal seat at that table. We represent officers who have lived through these incidents and the review process that follows. That perspective is critical to ensuring that the policies that are developed are grounded in neutrality, accuracy, and the realities of the job. Our request is pretty straightforward. We just ask that the Vermont FOP must be included as a formal participant in this process, not as a consultant, not as an optional stakeholder, but as a defined and permanent seat at that table when guidelines and procedures are developed. The Vermont FOP represents a large portion of sworn law enforcement officers across the state, and our membership is constantly growing. When policies govern the careers, responsibilities, and post-incident processes of the officers we represent, we must have a formal role in shaping them. There is a matter of completeness and legitimacy in the process. This is not about replacing any existing forces or agencies. It is about ensuring the working group includes a full operational perspective from those who are directly impacted across municipal, sheriff, and state police functions. Finally, when policy development is delegated to a group of law professionals, clarity on membership is essential. The process that governs the full scope of critical incident review must include both operational leadership and representatives from those directly subject to its outcomes. Without that balance, the system is incomplete. Any final version of this bill should explicitly include the Vermont FOP as part of the working group, working collaboratively to identify protocols and best practices for independent investigations of officer-involved critical incidents. That inclusion ensures the process reflects the operational realities and perspectives of the officers directly governed by these policies. This bill represents a strong step forward in establishing clear, consistent, and durable guidelines that will guide future officers, department leadership, the current and future officers of the Attorney General, and the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So the criminal order of police is not currently listed in here, and your request is to have the FOP in this group.
Yes.
And you may have mentioned this. Does the FOP also include chiefs of police, or are they two separate and distinct associations?
Two separate associations. Chiefs can choose to join the FOP and then obtain the legal coverage through the FOP. So the FOP, if you are a full-time law enforcement officer, part-time law enforcement officer, you can sign up, you can join a lodge, and then you can obtain the legal coverage that comes with that, no matter your rank.
Yeah, at first glance, I mean, my thought is if we're having the chiefs of police be a part of the group, I don't know why we wouldn't also have the FOP in the group, which I'm assuming encompasses all staff or all police officers who are, for lack of a better word, boots on the ground that are more likely to be involved in the shooting than the chief of police.
Yes, our majority of our membership are patrol officers, detectives, those on the ground working every single day in the field.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But it's an optional organization, right? So it's not necessarily every officer.
No, I mean, I think the estimate of range currently is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 officers in this building. So we are a large chunk. We are not all.
Okay.
But you can look at the record of the FOP nationally as well. Our goal is to represent officers as public as fairly as we possibly can. And whether I'm talking about my members or the 700 other members, I'm thinking about that's our goal, is to get them in a place where they are being treated correctly and where everything is done fairly and transparent. Doesn't matter if I'm talking about the 300 I represent 700 I currently don't.
Wondering if you should also ask the Urban Association.
That was gonna be one of my next recommendations. I think that would make sense.
I'm sure perhaps we may or may not hear reasons as to why we should or shouldn't make those two changes. So we're not going to vote on the bill today, but that's helpful. I'll ask you this. Did you testify to the same point in the House Judiciary Committee?
At the time, it was a very different bill. So now at the time it was very specific to process. And with your new bill that you have here, it's completely different. I can tell that it's more of establishing that working group for guidelines and protocols. So my testimony was very different at the time. It was more focused on speaking about process and making sure that the process was shortened, because it used to be 55 days generally that you would go through this process. And now you're talking upwards of a year. And I feel that as an issue.
Maybe any other questions?
I don't have a question, but in the same vein of sort of thinking about the entire process, I'd like to hear from the Human Rights Commission, as I think they sort of often are involved in the other side. And I am going to use the word victim here, because I think if you've been shot, you are a victim, regardless of the intent of the people who might be seeking. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not trying to undermine that somebody being shot does not make them a victim. I just found it disheartening in the last time that I heard about this, that officers being referred to as defendants when, unless you have been charged criminally, you were not a defendant. That was my issue there. And generally, if the officer is justified in their use of force, they are the victim in that instance, because they are a victim of crime. That's why they have use of force.
I don't think that happened in this committee, but I appreciate that.
Yes, I know we did not. I'm just pointing something out that I felt we needed to put out there.
Any other questions?
I think exploring the possibility of I support having the FOP and along with the Insurance Association, looking at the list of individuals on this bill, it seemed to be administrative type. And I think that for those individuals who are on the ground, who may be involved in this, I think you should at least have a seat at the table. So I certainly support this. Yes.
Thank you. Anything else? Anything else? Okay. Thank you. We have the Attorney General's in the room. I'm wondering if you have any initial reactions or thoughts that you'd like to share regarding these ideas.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Todd Delos, Assistant Attorney General. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about H-171. We testified upstairs on this. That's a very challenging space. I think this committee understands that. And I think with the previous witness, I believe I'm probably the person who has been suggested was calling police officers defendants. So let me provide a little context for my testimony upstairs, because I think it's really important context to understand this bill. This bill grew out of a concern around the duration of investigations into officer-involved shooting. And the current version you see in front of you was a desire to say, look, there isn't a statute that governs any kind of these investigations. We look at homicide and justifiable homicide, and we look at use of force and the changes to the use of force law that this body passed about 6 years ago. That then guides what these investigations look like. And where I think the concern over considering police officers defendants comes from is understanding what these investigations are. These are not HR investigations. These are not administrative investigations. These are investigations when, as Senator Mahowski put it, an individual has been the victim of a shooting, whether it's a justifiable shooting or not. And the way that the Attorney General's office undertakes this work is to look at this as a potential criminal case. Very frequently, it is not. Or rather, the shooting is not the criminal case. The underlying criminal conduct that led to the officer's response may well be. So the goal here was to ensure that we created a policy with the folks who actually do the investigations into the officer-involved shooting. And this is where I think the language becomes important when we look at it. we get a case, it's VSP does the investigation into the incident. And we get from the major crimes unit an investigative file. We then are looking at that as a potential prosecution. And part of the reason these reviews take a while is because we are looking to determine whether this actual charges will be brought against a law enforcement officer, which is one of the more serious charges. Even if it's a misdemeanor, it's a big deal. And we want to make sure we're very, very careful in charging or not. I would suggest to this committee, part of the reason that you're looking at the administrative types in D who are involved in creating this process is because those are the folks who are carrying out the investigation, right? It's the Attorney General's office and state's attorneys who do the review and potential prosecution or don't charge. It's DPS and VSP and the chiefs of police who are also involved from the standpoint of workforce, right? When folks are off the street in these administrative leaves, that's challenging. But
Can I ask you a question that is maybe a little unfair, and that is what the role of the Criminal Justice Council is? Because I know they have a role with use of force, so I would imagine they'd have a role with stuff like this as well, but maybe I'm wrong.
not in the investigation, right? The investigation is a question of criminal or again, more frequently, not criminal conduct, right? Because that's most of these cases turn out where there is no charge brought because the use of force was justified. There may be subsequent to those decisions and those determinations that actually have the Criminal Justice Council, but usually it would flow from it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up? Major Crimes Unit does the investigation, you said, and are they? Well, I know they're in the Department of Public Safety, but I mean, would it make sense that if we're having the Troopers Association on there, that they would put a member of the Major Crimes Unit in here? Would that make sense for what this is trying to accomplish?
I think what I would recommend to the committee is that the individuals who may be subject to an officer involved shooting investigation not take part in developing that investigative process. Right? We don't, and again, this I understand. I want to be really clear. In the majority of these cases, the officer is clear and was in one of the most challenging circumstances a law enforcement officer could be. So I don't want to minimize that at all. But I can't think of another scenario where you would include a potential criminal defendant in creating the process for the investigation into that potential criminal conduct. I will say, Department of Sheriff's State's Attorneys is there, so you've got sheriff engagement. DPS is there, you've got potential trooper engagement that way, and the chiefs of police are there. And the goal there was to get the operational boots on the ground experience through that leadership, but also ensure that the prosecutors are also able to move prosecution and investigation forward. And I was, because it was stated that we were referring to police officers as defendants, I'm going to just keep coming back. In the majority of cases, that is not how it turns out, but we certainly see incidents, and we saw one just recently with a charge against an officer where we believe we will seek criminal penalties for some of that conduct.
So I'm just trying to suss all this out because I also know that the Human Rights Commission does investigations into law enforcement action. They, however, don't have the capacity to bring criminal charges. But if they found that they thought, do you see what I'm trying to?
I don't know.
Okay.
But if I were to guess, usually that's a civil response.
Okay.
Right? And so we would deal with the criminal element first. If there was any criminal conduct, then criminal charges would be brought. Again, there usually isn't, and then they do the role to the HRC. After that, I don't really know when they step in. I would guess none of those investigative files would be available to the HRC unless and until, even if I'm not even sure it would be available to the HRC if the officer were cleared.
Okay.
So if I want to name it's a very challenging subject, and they're very sensitive investigations, and it is an extreme burden. I don't in any way want to undermine or minimize the challenge for the officers when they're out on leave waiting to determine whether they're going to be charged or not. That would be an incredibly challenging circumstance, especially when they've already gone through this really difficult event that led to the discharge of the firearm in the line of duty. And there's still the possibility that this ends up in a criminal prosecution, and it is our position that we think that process should be driven by the folks who be involved in that determination.
I get your point. It's making more sense now. You wouldn't want. Well, but yeah, I get where you're coming from. On the other hand, I'm wondering if rather than necessarily being directly involved in the creation of protocols and best practices, to at least require this working group here to consult with and seek input from the other associations described. I think would be valuable for them to at least hear from from members of those organizations, if just their input on the process, and then ultimately having the deciding power being left with the AGO, DSAS, DPS, and the chiefs of police.
I think that is totally reasonable. I would say the other element that didn't come up, but I think it's important, it's not necessarily officer involved shooting, but there's a broader piece here, which is the mental health and well-being of those officers and how they are being supported. And I think there was some really compelling testimony from the officers upstairs about their, the experience they're going through. And again, I don't think it's necessarily germane, but I do want to raise that as well. And there's an element to what you're suggesting there.
Yeah.
At least more could come out of it than just a protocol or an OAS, but some kind of encouragement or structure that supports those officers in that challenging time. And I think that probably falls with the law enforcement agencies themselves, but that doesn't touch on another role or avenue for legislation.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think, committee, are we generally supportive of the idea of further exploring creating a second subsection where this working group will at least consult with and get input from those associations that were previously described? Is there any opposition to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm open to exploring it.
Senator Cheam, I don't want to speak out of turn. Can I just rebuttal one thing when you have a second?
Yes, let me just finish this up and then we can.
I think my opinion on this is ultimately the Attorney General's office, the state attorney's officer, who would decide in fact who may or may not have charges pressed against them, period. Doesn't matter about the other entities that are involved in setting up this procedure. We need to stay within, this is simply to facilitate cooperations amongst the entities responsible for investigating the officer involved shooting. Let's not make this too broad. Is my point. That's why it's a page and a half here. I don't have a problem with them reaching out and taking testimony from whatever things we do here, but I don't think we need to blow us out of proportion to have 20 different groups on this particular officer involved shooting committee show.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that when you start, it's definitely easy to open the door and then everybody wants it's like a clown car. Everybody wants to get on it. But that's how it is with almost everything here. So, but I still think it would be worthwhile for the working group to at least get input from the very people who may be involved in the investigation. I don't see how that would be necessarily a bad thing, but I get the point of not necessarily wanting them to be policymakers for the organizations that are actually doing the investigation. Anything else? Sarah Mattis, any thoughts?
No, not right now.
Anything further for you?
I'm happy to answer questions, happy to come back, happy to provide more information about the current. There is I want to be clear, there is a process for how these work. It is not distilled into any kind of statutory or policy, capital P policy. And I think we'd be comfortable in the direction.
Thank you. Officer Coro, did you You want to follow up?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is to say that because officers are involved in these, they can't be a part of the working group. Seems kind of ridiculous to me considering chiefs are also involved in it as well. There's Chief Ludlow who was just cleared of a shooting, I think a month and a half ago. In the last month or so, they're involved in them as well. So to cut out these two groups just because they could be involved in the shooting, I think you're missing a whole piece there. We do expect our administrators to go forward and give the information for it, but I do feel it's important that we have members who are going to be a lot more forward with us and going to give us a lot more information, and they're going to feel more listened to if they have a place on the table. If they don't have a place at the table, they're going to feel like this policy was decided and this is all decided without their input at all. I understand I can come and I can speak just like this one time to this group, but I do not think that's going to be as effective. I think bringing Troopers Association, like I put forward earlier, and bringing the FOP together into that group makes more sense to me. I think the argument that we're involved in this, so we shouldn't have any say in it, that seems kind of ridiculous to me.
Any questions or follow? Okay, thank you. All right, I think that wraps it up for today. So we can